How much has the current culture of college football changed because of NIL and the one-time transfer rule? Not even just college football, but college athletics as a whole.
You are Locked On Longhorns, your daily podcast on the Texas Longhorns. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Longhorns, the show. Jonathan Davis, your host. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more, and new customers join today, and you'll get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. On today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, we are discussing NIL and the one-time transfer rule. How much has it affected the current landscape of college athletics? On my last episode, Trevor Sikkema from Pro Football Focus came on the show and gave us so many gems and insight on some of our top prospects for the NFL draft from the Texas Longhorns football team. He was on site at the NFL Draft Combine over the weekend, and so once again provided a ton of analysis on what he saw and how our players performed. And if you haven't got a chance to listen to that, please go check it out. It's my last episode on Locked On Longhorns, but I will be recapping, some of the major things he said on last episode, on today's episode. And then in the last segment, or just after that, a mailbag, answering some of your questions and, responding to some of your YouTube comments live on the show. All of that and more on today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So we are talking about, NIL and the one-time transfer rule and how much it's affected the current landscape of college athletics. And I got this idea to talk about this. I wanted to talk about this based on an article that ESPN released yesterday on Nick Saban's retirement, right? And it kind of went into all the weeds and the details of how everything took place with his retirement that seemed so abrupt for us, but this is why they, journalism exists, right? Because when you read the article, you'll see that this somewhat was in the works for over a year, right? But what really caught my eye in the article was him talking about his motivations for leaving, right? And he didn't blame the players, or he didn't blame NIL. He's certainly pro players getting paid. We all should be pro players getting paid for their services, even though we probably need to find a better way to pay them, or a better structure to pay them, as I'll talk about, a little bit later in the episode. But some of his comments about NIL and how it's affecting the sport, and how, players' motivations now are completely different than players' motivations when he started, were really interesting to me. And I wanted to talk about maybe how, NIL and the one-time transfer rule may be affecting the sport in a not so positive way, right? Before we get into that, Steve Sarkisian was mentioned in the article, and we all, collectively held our breath a little bit when Nick Saban retired, because we knew that Steve Sarkisian would be a prime candidate for the job, right? Steve Sarkisian, every chance he gets, credits Nick Saban and Pete Carroll, for him being the man he is today and him being the coach he is today. And of course, his latest stint before he took the job at the University of Texas was coaching as an offensive coordinator at Alabama. And he won a national championship in 2020 before taking the job at Texas in 2021. And a lot of people thought that Steve Sarkisian would be the likely replacement for Nick Saban at Alabama, especially when he first left to go to the University of Texas. But we now know, or officially know because of this article, that Steve Sarkisian was never a real candidate for the job, right? The two real candidates for the job were Mike Norvell from Florida State and then Kalen DeBoer from Washington, who ultimately accepted it. And Steve Sarkisian was not a candidate for the job based on merit, right? Like, obviously, based on what he's built the last 3 years at the University of Texas, there's over 100 schools in the country that would come calling for Steve Sarkisian if he became available. But he was not a candidate for the job because of merit, essentially, right? Like, because of what he did in a positive way. They knew that based on what he had built the last 3 years at the University of Texas, that he would not leave to go to Alabama, who is in the same conference as Texas now, or I guess will be on July 1st. When moving forward, right? Let's erase the past, right? It'll confuse you, right? Let's just talk about today moving forward. Right now in football, Texas is a comparable program to Alabama, especially with the departure of Nick Saban. So Steve Sarkisian, we now know officially, was never a true candidate for the job, not because they didn't think he could do a good job, but because he's done such a great job at the University of Texas, they absolutely knew he would not leave, right? And we're grateful that he didn't, got paid, got extended. Hopefully he's the coach at the University of Texas for a very long time. But now I want to get into the NIL piece and, how much the landscape of college football and college athletics has changed, period. But first, I'm going to read an excerpt from this ESPN article that came out yesterday on Nick Saban's retirement. And I'm going to start with, once back in Tuscaloosa, as Saban began meeting with players, it became even more apparent to him that his message wasn't resonating like it once did. I thought we could have a hell of a team next year, said Nick Saban. And then maybe 70 or 80% of the players you talk to, all they want to know is two things. What assurances do I have that I'm going to play? Because they're thinking about transferring. And how much are you going to pay me? Saban recounted. Our program here was always built on how much value we can create for your future and your personal development, academic success in graduating, and developing an NFL career on the field. So I'm saying to myself, maybe this doesn't work anymore, that the goals and aspirations are just different and that it's all about how much money can I make as a college player. I'm not saying that's bad. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying that's never been what we were all about. And it's not why we had success through the years. And you read that article, you read those quotes, and to me, it's damning, right? Like it's kind of crazy. And it just speaks to how much that the culture has changed and the landscape has changed. And thankfully, if you're listening to this, you're probably a Texas fan, and Texas will really never have to worry too much, especially with their success on the field, of losing players to NIL, right? Or players transferring, right? Because, they're not winning or not playing at a high level at the University of Texas, or they're not making the money they want to make, right? Because there's few schools in the country that can pay their players like Texas can, right? In this current, landscape of NIL. But I ask, is it making a positive change to the sports we love? Because in a sense, money is the root of all evil. And what has always attracted us to college athletics is the passion and the amateurism, right? Not that people were against players getting paid, but you knew that these players were playing for pride, passion, and their universities, right? And you knew when a player committed to your school, they planned to be there 3 to 4 years for development and getting to the next level at the National Football League. That was the most important to them. That's what motivated players in the past, right? Development, getting to the National Football League, and winning national championships. But as Nick Saban just, beautifully recounted in this article, now the conversations are, how much are you going to pay me? And how much am I going to play next year? When he had a team that was capable of winning a national championship last year, and he has a team that's capable of winning a national championship in 2024. And after a tough season where you're thinking, okay, we can run it back, all these players are in your office asking, how much am I going to get paid? And will I be playing next year? Let me know now. If not, I can enter the transfer portal. And as he said, that's not the foundation that he won 6 national championships on. That's not the foundation that he, had 15 or whatever it is, 10 win seasons on. The motivation has changed. The landscape has changed in college athletics. And that passion and amateurism that was there in the past is now gone, right? Because now these players, they're not necessarily committing to these schools anymore. They're now all on player options, right? Essentially, every player in college athletics is on a 1-year player option every year. And every year they can come back to the table and demand more. Every year you have to re-recruit your roster now, because what you told this player and what you gave this player his freshman year may not be good enough his sophomore year, right? That is the current landscape now of college athletics, and it is changing the sport. Is it changing it for the better or for the worse? It's a combination of both, but we can't ignore that pantheon greats in our sport have moved on largely because the current landscape of college athletics has changed. Jay Wright was at Villanova winning national championships, being in that conversation every year. He walked away, what some would say, too soon. North Carolina, Roy Williams, the year after he left, that team went to the national championship. He could still be competing for championships at North Carolina. He walked away. Coach K, his last year, they went to the Final Four. He walked away. Like I said, Nick Saban has a championship level team right now. I know they lost some players, but that's still a ton of talent on that roster, right? Especially before he decided to leave. And he walked away. Now, all these coaches are old. They probably were, getting closer to retiring, period. But I think what has happened in college athletics with NIL and the one-time transfer rule and having no structure has pushed these coaches kind of out the door. And they've decided, this is not what I signed up for, right? This is not why I got into coaching 15, 20, 25 years ago, right? To every year have to listen to these demands from my players on how much they're going to play and how much they're getting paid. And once again, money is the root of all evil, because once money starts to enter the conversation, that's where resentment comes in, right? Look at NFL players, right? The reason that a lot of college fans don't watch the NFL is because these players are getting paid millions of dollars. And you know for a fact that some of these players don't care at all, right? Like, they just treat it as if I'm making $1 million, that's it. They don't care about football. They're not as passionate about football and about the team as you are, right? When you look at the NBA, these players are making $300-400 million, and load management is a thing. They're sitting out games just because they want to. They don't care, right? A lot of them don't care as much as we would like them to do, right? And a lot of that has to do with the money they're making. Look at Major League Baseball. Like, Ben Simmons, right? Basketball. He paid $200 million. He's on a $200 million contract. He's played like 25, 30 games over the last couple of years. You know what I'm saying? Look at Anthony Rendon in Major League Baseball. Every chance he gets, he tells you how much he hates playing baseball. And he's on a $250 million contract. So when you look at it, right, like, money is affecting the motivation, right? And the more money that these players are making, the less that a lot of them will care about the respective sport they're playing. And that amateurism and that passion that, has brought so many people to college athletics and made so many people fall in love with college athletics over, a span of how many years, is dying out, because now what is motivating these players is making money in playing time. If you can't offer me making money in playing time, I am leaving to go find that money and go find that playing time. I want to look at a specific situation with Oklahoma, and I know they're a rival, but look at this situation unbiased if you can. Caden Green was one of the best guards in the country this year as a true freshman. As an Oklahoma fan, you're expecting him to be at Oklahoma for the next couple of years. As a staff member at Oklahoma, you're expecting him to be at Oklahoma for the next couple of years. As a fan, you want Caden Green to be as passionate about Oklahoma football as you are. But yet Missouri comes in after his freshman year, offers him a bigger bag than Oklahoma can, and he ups and leaves. Why would Oklahoma fans not resent Caden Green? Why would Oklahoma fans not feel some type of way about Caden Green? They're pro players getting paid. They want him to get paid, but he had everything he wanted at the University of Oklahoma. And another school came in and said, here's more money, and he upped and left. How would Texas fans feel today if Xavier Worthy made the decision to go to USC? Most Texas fans would resent Xavier Worthy. Most Texas fans would not care for Xavier Worthy. Imagine how you would have felt if Kelvin Banks, after his freshman year, up and left and went to Oregon because they offered him more money. Like I said, we're at the University of Texas, so we're usually the school offering more money. But imagine how Texas fans would feel about Xavier Worthy or Kelvin Banks in those scenarios. The fact is, NIL and the one-time transfer rule is changing the landscape of college athletics. And that passion and amateurism that led us to the sport is dying. Right? Because what motivated players 15 years ago is not what motivates players now. And when some of the Pantheon greats like Nick Saban, Roy Williams, Jay Wright, and Coach K decide to move on because this is not what they signed up for in the sports that they dedicated their entire lives to, they said, you know what? I think retirement will be better than continuing to try to coach in this environment. When the Pantheon greats in college athletics are deciding to move on because of the current culture of the sport, and we have absolutely no structure in terms of how these players are getting paid and how they can use their leverage to get paid and move from school to school to school. When some of the greatest people we've ever seen in our sports are deciding to move on, to me, that's a huge red flag. And we need a lot of structure, and we need a lot of adjusting in college football, college athletics, period, right now, because we are shifting to an environment where everything in college football will be decided by money. And every decision these players make will be decided by money, right? And you will no longer have commitments from these players. They'll all be on player options. And every year you'll have to come back to the table to re-recruit that player. And we're moving toward a society where every year that player will come back to the table and demand more. And that is the reason that we're seeing some of the greatest coaches of all time leave the sport. And that is the reason that college football is not the college football you grew up loving, and why it will never, ever, ever be the same. Quick word from our sponsors, and then we're getting into Trevor Sycamore from Pro Football Focus and everything he had to say about some of your favorite Texas Longhorn prospects in the upcoming NFL draft. All right, today's episode of Locked On Longhorns is brought to you by Amazon Fire TV. Fire TV is your destination for sports, from live games to highlights to in-depth analysis. Fire TV offers amazing viewing experiences with smart TVs, as well as the Fire TV stick that you can plug into your existing TV that provides access to millions of movies and TV episodes, as well as free and live TV. Whether it's opening weekend for baseball or the college basketball tournament, you're going to want to have a Fire TV. Fire TV recently created Fire TV channels to deliver a constant supply of the latest videos from your favorite sports brands, all for free. That includes all of us at Locked On and most of the big pro leagues and college conferences as well. Fire TV channels let you dive into all of the game analysis, highlights, and more to keep up to date on all the latest in the world of sports, March Madness, NBA, MLB, and lots more. Not to mention great news, entertainment, gaming, travel, cooking videos as well. Check out Fire TV channels on Fire TV and Alexa devices. If you haven't checked out Fire TV channels, you should. Trust me on this. To learn more, visit www.amazon.com/LockedOnFireTV. All right, talking about some of the prospects at the NFL Draft Combine. Once again, Trevor Sycamore from Pro Football Focus came on and did a really good job detailing, these players' performances and what they mean for their prospects at the next level. So we're going to start with Xavier Worthy, and he talked about how coming into this process, he thought Xavier Worthy was, more than likely a second-round pick rather than a first-round pick. He talked about a slight frame being at 166 pounds, and, when you watch the tape, him being 166 pounds shows up. A lot of times when we see small players, we'll say they play bigger, than they are. You don't necessarily see that on tape a ton with Xavier Worthy, especially at the catch point, contested catches, playing through traffic, et cetera, et cetera. But he ran a 4.21, breaking the record at the NFL Draft Combine. And we talked about how when you have that type of speed in this current landscape of football, where you're playing basketball on grass and everything is so spread out and you just want to get the ball into the hands of your playmakers and let them make plays, how can 32 teams pass on a player that runs a 4.21 and is a threat to score from anywhere on the field, regardless of his weight, regardless of your contested catch concerns, right? So I do think there are still some teams that will look at Xavier Worthy as a second-round pick or will not take him in the first round because they're not sure of if he can be a game changer for 10 to 15 years at the NFL level. But Xavier Worthy absolutely ran himself into the first round over the weekend, as Trevor Sycamore will tell you on the latest episode, because there's no way that 32 teams will pass on the opportunity to have either the fastest or maybe second fastest player in the National Football League on their offense for at least 4 to 5 years. And moving on to Adonai Mitchell, we talked about how the major concern, there's not even really a concern for Adonai Mitchell, is there's some inconsistency on tape, right? We talked about how when he knows the ball is coming his way, when he's invested, when he's, ready to go and fire it up, he's one of the best receivers in college football, period. I mean, he's one of the best receivers in college football, period. But, you're talking about putting him in that Marvin Harrison Jr., Rome Odunze, Malik Neighbors class, right? As the clear top three in the NFL draft coming into 2024, he's that dominant when he's locked in, right? But then there's also times where, he's laissez-faire, he's not really blocking, and he's just kind of checked out, right? And I think that's kind of the major things that scouts are looking at going into the NFL, because the NFL draft process, you're investing, 10s, 20s, and 30s of millions into these players. You have to nitpick a little bit. But outside of that, right, Adonai Mitchell is a dog, right? And he talked about how coming into the year, he had Adonai Mitchell, or maybe just in the draft process period, he had Adonai Mitchell as the fourth best wide receiver in the NFL draft. And I think you can make an argument that Adonai Mitchell is indeed the fourth best wide receiver in this NFL draft, if not higher, right? And I think with him running a 4.34, because one of the question marks on Adonai Mitchell would be his measurables, with him running a 4.34, I think that squarely put him in the first round, right? I thought that he was a late first round, early second round pick. I don't know how you pass on a 6'2", 205-pound player that runs a 4.34 that has first round tape without question in Adonai Mitchell. So I think that his combine performance squarely put him in the first round. I think there's a chance he could have slipped to the second round, but first round tape, first round measurables, Adonai Mitchell is a first round player. That's what Trevor Sycamore brought to the podcast. Then talking about Byron Murphy, we talked about how Byron Murphy is listed at 6 foot, 297 pounds, right? In the past, that would have been a red flag. In the past, Byron Murphy may have moved down draft boards because he's undersized for his position. But when we've seen players like Aaron Donald, obviously he's, the exception, but we've seen players like Aaron Donald and in recent memory, Ed Oliver, these more undersized athletic players that are able to still move people up front with their strength, but do a really good job of being agile, athletic, and getting to the quarterback and making so many plays in the run game and pass game. You have more faith that a player like Byron Murphy can dominate at the next level. And even though he's only 297 pounds, I promise you, pound for pound, he's one of the strongest people in college football and will be one of the strongest people in the National Football League, right? And you just look at what he was able to do on tape, dominating in the run game, passing game, and just never taking a play off. He looks like a surefire first-round pick, a surefire top 10 to top 15 pick. And so that's what we talked about with Byron Murphy. Even though he's undersized, he's one of the best players in this draft and should not be on the board when the second half of the first round comes along. Then we talked about T'Vondre Sweat because I believe he's become one of the most polarizing players in this NFL draft process. And you talked about the weight, right? And the weight concerns and, not weighing in at the Senior Bowl and how that was viewed as a red flag. But then also he shows up at 366 pounds, which is really good because, Texas had him listed as 362. And then he runs, a 5.27, which is amazing for a player at that size, right? And so, there's question marks about will he be able to stay at 366 pounds and his motivation, and will you be constantly having to deal with that weight, and is he a 2-down player versus a 3-down player, and how much can you maximize his value if you can't use him for 3 downs? And then as I've said in the past, there's the people that watch the tape and just say, damn, like he's gonna be a dog, right? And I think Trevor Sycamore was leaning more towards damn, he's going to be a dog. But I do think he ends up as a second or third round pick, even though he mostly has first round tape because of those questions about his weight and, his potential effectiveness at the next level. Talking about Ja'Tavion Sanders, we talked about the 40 time, and, he just talked about how Ja'Tavion Sanders is so explosive on tape, right? And how he looks like that next tight end that can just be such a weapon and such a mismatch at the next level. And he still believes that and still believes that Ja'Tavion Sanders will be a really good player at the next level. And scouts still love what they see from Ja'Tavion Sanders. But a lot of the appeal of Ja'Tavion Sanders is that he is an athletic move type tight end that can, kind of cosplay as a wide receiver at times. And with a 4.74 and 4.69 40, that is not what a lot of people were expecting, right? He said he thought that, Ja'Tavion Sanders was more of a 4 or 5 guy. So I still think Ja'Tavion Sanders gets drafted relatively high. I still think he has a really good NFL career, and maybe he just didn't run well that day, but I do think scouts are having second thoughts. Maybe not huge second thoughts, but are at least questioning why Ja'Tavion Sanders ran a 4.69 or 4.74 that day. We also talked about Jonathan Brooks. He said Jonathan Brooks still is his unquestioned running back one, even though he is not available right now based on everything he put on tape last year. I tend to agree. And then we talked about Quinn Ewers, what he needs to do to be drafted or be the first quarterback drafted next year. No doubt in my mind, he'll be a first-round pick. He just said the consistency, right? You see the Alabama game, and then you wonder why Quinn Ewers can't do that week in and week out. And he got a lot better at it at the end of the season. Really, his last 6-7 weeks were pretty consistent. But I think the next step for Quinn Ewers in terms of being the first quarterback taken off the board next year is, can he show that consistency week in and week out? And for 12, 13, 14 games next year, however many games we play, can every game look like the Alabama game for Quinn Ewers? That's the next step he needs to take to make sure he's the first quarterback taken off the board next year in the NFL draft. Quick word from our sponsors, and then we get out of here with some of your YouTube comments and some of your questions on the show. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. All right, the first exchange I want to read is a conversation I had with, I think this is Benjamin Finley. This is the other day after Texas beat Texas Tech, and I came on here talking about how I wish more Texas fans embrace the rivalry. I do think that Texas Tech and Texas is a rivalry. They'll be playing for the last time that I can think of, in baseball this weekend, and then Texas won't have to travel to Lubbock for a very long time. But I just came out here talking about how I think it's a rivalry. I know most Texas fans don't, and I wish we embraced it more while we had the opportunity to. And this was this exchange was a result of that video I did. This is from Benjamin Finley. I think of a rival as a peer, an entity that is comparable in terms of sports, academics, global impact, etc. Let's be honest, the University of Texas doesn't have many of those, and they sure aren't in the Big 12. It's only a rivalry if both parties are equally invested and passionate about the contest. My response: that's the thing, though. I think the fans and players are equally invested in the contest. As I mentioned, it's clear that game meant more to our team and Brock Cunningham. I think it meant a lot to the fans as well. The point most Texas fans are making is Texas Tech isn't good enough to be our rival, and I don't agree with that. One side embraces it, the other side claims they are too good for it. Benjamin's response: I wish I could agree, and I do on your point of our guys winning this game. They absolutely did. But the behavior of Tech fans I've witnessed in person and on TV tells me that we're just not the same kind of people. And there are really no applicable comparisons between the two schools other than being in the same state and conference. Thanks for the reply, man. I love your podcast. All right. And then my response is that's a good perspective, especially on fan behavior. I think a point adjacent to the one you made is that Tech could go 1-11, but if they beat Texas, it would probably be a successful season. Texas beating Tech doesn't do as much for us, especially in football. Appreciate the dialogue. So that was just really good dialogue I had with Benjamin Finley about Texas Tech being a rival. Here's another conversation I had with on that. This is from Texas Couch Coach 256. The no 5 stars. I said Texas Tech has never fielded a 5-star football player that they recruited against the University of Texas. So, bragging about Texas all-time record over Texas Tech is a little, I don't know what the word is, but you can use context clues. The no 5 stars is where it starts with me, why they aren't a rival. They don't really rival us. I only want to beat them because they want to beat us so bad, and damn, is it funny to win. Otherwise, they aren't a bugaboo otherwise they are a bugaboo on a yearly basis, which is, never mind. Otherwise, they aren't a bugaboo on a yearly basis, which is what makes someone a rival. OU is always standing in our way, and in the years they aren't, they are still the bugaboo. In fact, this year, OU beat us, but we are just as likely to beat them. Texas Tech is not as likely to beat us. They have been better at basketball and baseball in recent years, so maybe in those sports, but football, they just aren't a rival. And my response to that was, I really like this response. Definitely could be sports specific. So by this logic, Clemson and South Carolina aren't rivals because South Carolina really has not gotten in the way of Clemson at all in recent memory. They just share a state and play each other yearly. Or Georgia and Georgia Tech, right? I'm sure Georgia considers Georgia Tech a rival, even though Georgia Tech can't compete with Georgia at all in football, right? And I never received a response, but that was just kind of like my thought process. If we're going to say that, Texas Tech is not Texas's rival because Texas Tech doesn't stop Texas from, accomplishing anything they want to do, which is not true because, 2008 Michael Crabtree, then there really aren't many rivalries in college football because how many rivalries are in college football where the teams are on an equal playing field? Ohio State and Michigan and Army, Navy. I mean, at this point, that's really about it, right? I guess you could say Texas, Oklahoma, but he kind of just, I don't even know if Texas and Oklahoma are on the same, path at this point. So, once again, I think Texas and Texas Tech are rivals. Most people don't. It honestly doesn't really matter at this point. Let me get out of here with one more. Get out of here with one more. So I was talking about how the new college football playoffs format affects the Texas Longhorns football team. And this is from Alan Watts. Credit Bama's early loss to Texas and last-second win over Georgia for putting the Horns in the Final Four this year. Otherwise, the Dogs are in and Texas is out. 100% with you on Colt at the top of the quarterback list. I was talking about who, out of Colt McCoy, Vince Young, Arch Manning, and Quinn Ewers, which would be the best fit in Steve Sarkisian's offense. I said Colt McCoy. He said Arch's vision and mobility put him on the same track. If he adds a deep ball, he's Sarkisian's wet dream come true. Sorry for not being PG-13 with that comment. And then I talked about how I don't like the fact that the top 4 seeds in the college football playoff new format won't get a home game, but 5 through 8 will. I just think that if Texas wins the SEC, they should be rewarded with a home game in DKR. But that also would kill the New Year's 6 bowl games if you didn't have them in the, second and third round of the college football playoffs. And this is from Ant_Alpha. New Year's Six bowl games were introduced well before the college football playoff was a thing. So what I would like for the committee to do is still have the allure of the New Year's Six bowl games, but have teams 5 through 12 play at those venues opening weekend. Then to reward teams seeded 1 through 4 with a home game in the following round. New Year's Six bowl games meant much more during the BCS system. Not saying to kill the Orange Bowl, Rose Bowl, Cotton Bowl, etc., but it might be time to adjust accordingly now that we have a 12-team playoff format. And I really love that comment. I really loved his insight, and I really love that idea. The only issue I had with it is there's 6 New Year's Six bowl games, right? New Year's Six, right? There's 6 of them. So if you only have 4 games in the second round of the playoffs, what happens to those other 2 New Year's Six bowls? Do we just get rid of them? Do you put other teams in there? That's the only question mark I would have about his proposal. How do you handle those extra 2 bowl games? And that's not even that really big of a concern. Right? Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Hook 'em. Peace.